The views and opinions expressed in these historical letters that may contain vernacular used in the World War II era, the post-war era, and the Cold War era do not reflect the views and opinions of any of the individuals involved with this project, including, but not limited to, the podcast's creators. Please note that the content of this episode deals with the loss of a loved one. It seemed important to note this up front, especially for any individuals who would listen to this episode and might be dealing with personal loss at this time. The episodes following this one will be referencing the subject matter that this episode covers, as what happened remains historical fact. My heart goes out to all those who grieve the loss of close friends and family. I hope that the love Sweetie brings in her letters, which is her greatest gift to the world, acts as a light in the darkness to help you process your own grief. It is my privilege and my deepest honor as Sweetie's granddaughter to share her heart with you. "11. Believed dead in New Mexico plane crash. Albuquerque, New Mexico, April 5th. A Navy transport plane flying from Phoenix, Arizona to Amarillo, Texas, reportedly with 11 passengers and crewmen, crashed 10 miles southeast of Albuquerque today, and first reports indicated all aboard were killed. Bodies were being brought into the French Fitzgerald mortuary in Albuquerque. Deputy Sheriff Ted Kemmer said, "It looks like everybody aboard was killed." A Navy spokesman in San Francisco said the plane had been based at Olathe, Kansas, and was engaged in a routine flight when it crashed. The plane was part of the Olathe Field Squadron. The wreckage was discovered by a resident of the rough, hilly country where the crash occurred. He called Albuquerque police, who reported it to the State Patrol. Everyone on the plane apparently was killed, Captain T.E. Jackson of the State Police said. A search is still being made of the wreckage, but the Navy said that 11 men were on board, and that's the number of bodies that have been brought out. It was believed that everyone was killed instantly. The plane did not catch fire. The Navy said the plane was a two-engined RD-4, which is the Navy equivalent of an Army C-47. Article from the Siskiyou Daily News, Friday, April 5th, 1946, page 1. Kansan among crash victims. Olathe, Kansas, April 6th. Public relations officers at the Olathe Naval Air Base today released the names of the 11 persons killed in the crash of a twin-engined Navy transport plane Thursday night, 13 miles southeast of Albuquerque. There were 3 crew members and 8 passengers in the plane when it crashed. All lost their lives. The plane was based here and was on a routine flight from Phoenix, Arizona to Amarillo, Texas. The crash victims included Lieutenant Robert Chester Demaree, co-pilot. Article from the Wichita Beacon, Saturday, April 6th, 1946, page 2. Good morning, Jamie.
Good morning, Allison.
So, today's episode is a little different than basically all of the other episodes that we've recorded thus far. As our listeners have heard, as our YouTube video audience has seen on the screen, right after that disclaimer that everyone's used to hearing, we have some news articles that just went across and were narrated from April 5th and April 6th of 1946, bearing the horrible, horrible news that a terrible accident has occurred. As far as the story goes, Sweetie's brother Bob, having been a pilot during World War II and surviving World War II and all of the stress and all the tension and anxiety there, survived only for, 8 months after the war to be a co-pilot in a plane that crashes just south of Albuquerque, New Mexico, with 10 other people on board. And I will note here, one of the other individuals on board is actually a wave. This is going to come up later, but it's terribly, terribly tragic for the family. Just when you think that things have normalized, at least to the extent of thinking that people are out of harm's way, especially service members in the family, in comes this awful, awful news affecting the family, which is that Bob is now gone. And Florence, of course, she's in Kansas at this time. He was part of the squadron at Olathe in Kansas there. So the routine flight, obviously, they were out west. It was from Phoenix to Amarillo, and then the plane crashes. Now, Florence is in Kansas, and the news is going to come across to Sweetie. And where we pick up with our story is right after Sweetie has left Iowa, which is going to make things very, very tense for Sweetie to have left her family in the Midwest, only for this to have occurred. So going into the first of the 3 letters today, heading into the immediate aftermath of the news breaking, this awful news for the family. And we start with April 8th, 1946. 936 Springfield Road, Collingdale, Pennsylvania, April 8th, 1946. Dearest Mama and Daddy, I had an airmail special delivery letter and a wire from Jeanne, and I called her long distance. She told and wrote me what she knew, which was little enough. I can't begin to say how shocked we were, nor how we felt since. I know how much worse it is for you both and for Florence, but I can judge, for I know my own feelings. I asked Jeanne about coming home, and she advised me to wait until arrangements could be made or until something was decided. She said, you'd both gone to Kansas, and you've probably had your hands full helping Florence and all. I love you both for it all. Helping Florence is wonderful. Perhaps I shall yet make it home, if you wire or call me. The whole thing is so inconceivable that I can't write or find proper words, and I'm afraid I'd make you feel worse if that's possible. I'm anxious to hear the results of the request and all about Florence. Will she stay with you? If you want me to come, wire or write, and I'll start as soon as I possibly can. I feel useless here. If we'd known this, you know I'd be with you now. Yeah. So,
Ugh.
and this is, of course, how Sweetie finds out, obviously, from Jeanne. No shocker there. And the long-distance phone call, of course, is made at this point, proving that there's a phone at Collingdale. She's able to get the information, and there's also a telegraph. We're going to hear a little bit more about this in the next letter. But a few days after, Sweetie's biggest concern, of course, is what's going on with Florence. And it's evident that the biggest concern of the family is we have to get to Florence.
Yeah.
She's there with the little baby, and this awful thing has happened. And the thing that absolutely gets to her more than anything else is she had just left Iowa. Her postcard, her handwritten note card from the previous episode, when she's en route and she's in Chicago, right before she catches the plane to the East Coast, is from March 26th. And she'd held out for how many months, dug her feet in, telling Lou, I don't want to come. And then she was kind of making up dates and things like that. Had she stayed for 2 extra weeks, she would have been home for family. And of course, this just annoys her to no end and frustrates her to no end, because all she wants to do is just, and it's natural. Who doesn't want to be with family at these times? Lou's there. I'm sure he's trying to help. But then she's also there with Sydney. And Sydney just lost her husband. So it's just like grief everywhere at Collingdale.
Yeah, there isn't really anybody
No.
close for her to talk with. Yeah, I
Right.
know she wants to be with her family,
Yeah.
of
Hmm.
course. And it's so awful, and she doesn't even make mention of it because she can't even write it down, like, what
Hmm.
happened
Yeah.
in this first paragraph.
Yeah.
So unless you knew, like, you would just know it was just something awful, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
I mean, you would know that there was a death, but she
Mhm.
can't say, like, she didn't write his name and she didn't say what it was,
Right.
and
It's never mentioned.
I can imagine this was so hard for her to get through that first.
Yeah. To get
Yeah,
that news. Yeah.
yeah. Ugh.
Yeah.
But, this is how it happened.
Hmm.
There's nothing that can be done at this point,
Right.
and, she feels like she's probably gonna try to go home
Yeah.
whenever they, like, give her
Oh,
some
yeah.
word. So
The
she's
minute
like,
she's like,
"Let me know."
let me know, I'm gonna go. So
Yeah.
question mark is she actually going to do that? But this is already a few days after, the event has occurred. And that's another reason that I brought up those two newspaper articles at the beginning. So at least we're not in a state of wonder about what's going on at this, because this has been communicated. She could have been the last to hear. We're not exactly sure, at what point she found out compared to the rest of the family, simply because she's at a longer distance than most of them. It was implied in one of the letters of the previous episode that Frank's near Chicago, and that's pretty common. So he's close by.
Mhm.
But as far as distance goes, she's the furthest away from home. So, and she's
Right.
well aware of it, and she hates it. But we'll continue from here. Lou is working at the Navy Yard and is very happy about it. He's signed up for on-the-job training and still hopes to go to Drexel Institute of Technology. Lewis has been sick with a bad cold he picked up from Lou and his mother. I'd really been lost without the medicine you fixed for me. It is much better, but it isn't clearing up the way I'd like it to. Can you suggest further treatment? In 2 weeks, we'll know if we get a 5-room bungalow 2.5 miles from here. It would really be ideal. We have high hopes. Do you know what became of the blue checkered romper we made for Lewis? Please send me the Department of Labor bulletin on child care, for I'm running into much trouble. I've been haunting the mailman. I guess there will be mail tomorrow, and on the hopes I'll close now till tomorrow and write again then, for I want this to go out tonight. I just can't say any more to try to help you, but do be sure that I'm with you every minute, and I love you both very much always. Your sweetie. Yeah. And I get the sense that there was only so much she could write. Like, she just kind of gave out at that point. She's like, here's the vitamin letter style. Daily update, Lewis is sick, this thing's going on here.
Mhm.
I'm just going to wait for more news from you, basically,
Yeah.
at the end there.
It's you're struggling.
Right? Yeah.
She's struggling. Anybody who's
Hmm.
ever had a death of a close family
Hmm.
member, a
Yeah.
sibling, or a parent,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
you're lost. You're lost for
Yeah.
words.
Yeah.
It's especially this is her older brother,
Hmm.
and she had just spent time with him in New York, so she had got
Yeah.
to see him,
With Florence. Yeah.
Florence, and and she has that relationship with Florence, which is beautiful.
Hmm. Yeah.
But you definitely, I so appreciate her
Hmm.
because we have seen other letters from other people,
Hmm.
Florence and Laura
Hmm.
and Chester
Chester's, yeah.
and Chester's.
Yeah.
But even Sweetie, like, we're blessed because she is such a good writer.
Yeah.
Like, she's so good. She gives us, I mean, she was struggling here, but
Hmm.
she gives us so much, and she's so
Hmm.
eloquent.
Yeah.
And I just really felt so bad for her.
Hmm. And unfortunately, it does get a little tougher here now. She writes again the next day. And so we do have the letter that she sends to Jeanne on April 9th. So this is 4 days after the news started to get into the papers. 936 Springfield Road, Collingdale, Pennsylvania, April 9th, 1946. Dear Jeanne, the telephone call to you was the closest I could get to the family, and it gave me some satisfaction just to talk to you. I can't even begin to tell you how I felt. I can't get into words what I feel, and if I could, it would only add to your grief and sorrow. I was so shocked I could hardly believe it. Once I did grasp it, I was completely floored. Your telegram was delivered at about 1:15 Saturday. A friend of Lou's had stopped in to see Louis and make visit. Then I saw the telegram. I thought it was telling me you had developed meningitis, and I was afraid to open it, but I just couldn't believe it. We called you then, and while there was little to say and so hard to talk about it, I was really glad to talk to you. You told us about the airmail special delivery letter, and so I started watching for it. When it wasn't here by noon on Sunday, I went to the post office and waited until a few minutes after 1, and got it. I can just imagine how hard the folks were hit. And poor little Florence. That has caused much of my ache, aside from the initial loss of Bob. To receive the wire, to go to Kansas to Florence, to try to help her through it all, is pretty wonderful, I think. And I'm sure it has called for all the courage and stamina they have. I just don't know what to do about it coming home. You could tell me nothing about the arrangements. I guess they weren't made yet. We didn't even know about a funeral. I want so much to be there with the family, and yet I'm not sure I could be there with Mama and Daddy and then go off and leave you all again. No matter how I feel now, I guess I'd better wait to hear what the plans are. I'll probably have heard before you get this. I hope so, for I've been haunting the mail carrier. There's so very much I need to know. The cause, about the folks, and Florence, and Cam, and all arrangements, that I hope you'll write as much as you can. I know it's asking you to rehash all the pain, but I just must know. Do write all you know. If we could have foreseen this, of course, I would never have left. But how could we? And I feel guilty and useless to be way off here. Yeah, so after she's processed a bit from the day before writing the first letter to Jeanne, then she catches Jeanne up on how she found out. But she thought Jeanne was sick. Jeanne's working at the hospital. She's an RN for our newer listeners. She's an RN working on the wards. And she's fearing the worst with that. And then this comes in. She's thrown off.
Yeah, it must have been I mean, she said, she was like, it was such a shock.
Mm-hmm.
Such a shock.
Yeah.
Of
and
course.
Then she walks to the post office. And she's just waiting. Like, I know I'm waiting for a letter. So you can imagine her just standing there being like, nope.
She was on a Sunday.
On a Sunday.
On a Sunday.
On a Sunday, there she is. Now, she's probably already well known to everybody at the post office at this point, knowing the frequency of letters that she would send out and she'd be looking for. She says, I'm haunting the carrier. And there she's somewhat haunting, the office itself on a Sunday, trying to get information because she's concerned. She's got to set up arrangements if she's going to get out there.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's a concern about how do you leave once you get out there. She's just going to want to stay again.
Of course.
And the thing that's not written about is Lou's probably a bit concerned that if she goes back to Iowa, it's going to be even harder than it was the first time to get her to come back east to stay with him. So there's also all of these thoughts probably in her mind. She notes it. This is what she's thinking about. But she does note the wonderful thing, which is, regardless of whatever disagreements potentially could have existed, and we've seen hints of this from Chester, throughout the first season, with regards to the relationship between Bob and Florence. And this is going to come up later in this episode about the religious differences. No question. They go to Kansas because they're trying to help. So we do know that as far as in-laws go, Chester and Laura at this point have clearly gone straight to Kansas to assist with the baby there. So we'll continue from here. We've got a lead on in good prospects for a 5-room house about 2.5 miles away from 936 Springfield Road in Norwood Park. We'll know in about 2 weeks if we'll get it or not. We're sure hoping. I've been busy since Louis caught a bad cold a day or two after I wrote to you, and he has really been a sick boy. I'd been lost for sure if I hadn't received the box you mailed out. He's improving, but he's still not well. It is worse than it was when I was with you in Des Moines. He's kept me hopping day and night, though it is easing up some now. Marguerite and Joe came from New York on Saturday night. They thought Lou was big and bright and cute, but I'd had your wire, and so I was quite uncommunicative, and so were they. I'm having a few troubles too, but they seem small and trivial now. A place of our own seems the solution, so I'm pinning high hopes on that. I'm sorry to have delayed so long in writing, but it was not because I didn't think about it, and you constantly, but because I was at such a loss for something to say. I know I must write Florence, but how and what can I possibly say to her? Can you help me on that? I'm going to write to the folks too, so I guess I'll have to stop. I'm only afraid I'll renew their grief. I want so much to be there. I hope I'll get word from you soon. Lou sends his best wishes. He's been at a loss, just as I have. All our love. Sweetie, Lou, and Louis. Give our best to sister, and I'll try to write her tomorrow. Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
poor thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, because we know, like, the situation isn't the best.
No.
At Collingsdale, Springfield Road. So it's not the best. Yeah. She needs her space.
Yeah, she
And
definitely.
then this situation comes up, and she really could use her sister.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she just wants to be home. Now, she notes a couple other things that are going on. We know that Lou seems to have some sort of steady work over at the Naval Yard, but Louis is sick, and this is a lot. He gets sick a lot as a kid, from beginning to a while, for him being a kid. So there's going to be a lot of commentary that she's going to have about things being brought down by, like, they were planning something, then Louis is sick. Now, she notes this because we all of a sudden have also Joe and Marguerite showing up in the scene. They're stopping by for a visit, but what can you really do? Of course, they find out this is going on. It's like, okay,
yeah.
too much. There's just too many elements basically coming in, and all she can think is, she's like, I have high hopes. We need space. I need to get out of here and not be here. And this is going to be the challenge, of course, I think, of a lot of the episodes we're going to have here at the beginning of season 2, which is, as far as the historical context goes, housing is really difficult to find in this time period, with everybody having returned back from the front in World War II. Housing is hard to come by. So they're hoping for a lot, but this is a very, very difficult housing market. And I'd mentioned in the previous episode, inflation's at like 14%, and there's labor strikes going on.
Yeah.
So
it's a rough time.
Yeah, it's just a really, really rough time in the background. And then there's the rough time from Sydney from the previous October in the background. And then all this is going on. And she's just like, I just want to get home to the Midwest. And she's going to keep going with that chorus. But she's always trying to sort of catch herself. And she's like, okay, let me get the vitamin information out. Okay, here we go. Like, here's what's happening. And then back to, but here's the feels, basically, with what's happening as she continues to process this just shock that's going through the system. And then,
these letters were for her probably the best. This was her therapy. This was her therapy. This was how she was doing what she could. And she recognizes that, like, what do you say?
Yeah.
Like, what is she going to write? Oh, hi, Florence,
Yeah.
I'm really sorry I can't be there. Louis, and then be like, oh, Louis is sick. I mean, what do you write? What do you write to her? I understand that.
You're right. Yeah.
And she, I don't think she, this isn't where you could just call.
Right.
And she can't get any information at all from newspapers or anything like that. Of course, it's not going to be like, there's going to be anything out there that's going to give her any information.
Yeah, if she got anything, it would have been clippings sent in the mail of maybe some of the papers from Kansas. I could see potentially Laura and Chester seeing an article in the newspaper in proximity because he was stationed at Olathe, and them being near Olathe, maybe an article coming by, and it's potential that she got that information. But at this point, she's like, they're just wondering what happened.
And just in the middle of New Mexico, just somewhere.
Basically, yeah. I mean, if you want to, I don't want to say it's exactly as the middle of nowhere, but we have enough information from some future content that's going to take us some time to get to. But we know precisely where this plane did crash. And it basically was just a barren landscape that it crashes into outside a more rural area, southeast of Albuquerque, New Mexico.
It's amazing, too, because, like you said, it was just a simple plane, and it just fell out of the sky.
Yep, it didn't catch fire.
Why?
We got that from the article, which originally when I'd first heard about this, I thought, unfortunately, there's been too much recent media about plane crashes, and I'm near Philadelphia, and there was just in the news. That was a totally different scene, what happened, I'm so sad to hear about the victims in that crash. But this is sort of different because there was no fire. But that leads us into our third letter for today. And I've got to say, this is probably one of the hardest letters to read on one side. At the same time, it's one of the most important letters in the collection that I've ever seen from Sweetie. When I was reading through these letters for the first time, and mind you, I'd already read through all of World War II, and I started reading this, Jamie, probably about the time, I would say somewhere around like May, June of 2023. So about the same time that we were just starting to talk about the podcast was when I read this letter for the first time. And I said, well, it has to be a podcast. We have to give this to the world, because Sweetie's ability to process the information and describe it that we mentioned earlier is really amazing. Her ability to quickly reflect back on processing her own grief in the letter we're about to hear is just, I think, beyond the scope of sort of an average human being to do it. And because of that, my hope to our listeners is that if anyone's dealing with grief, I hope that Sweetie's ability to journal her grief and process helps you in whatever stage you're in to handle your own. Because as much as this is an incredibly tragic, sad event for this family, I think she provides sort of a path forward for everybody, just as humans in dealing with these sorts of issues. So this next letter, again, I think one of the most important to the podcast that I've ever read. And we'll get started.
936 Springfield Road, Collingdale, Pennsylvania, April 15th, 1946. Dear Jeanne, and dearest Mom and Daddy, your letter dated the 14th came this a.m., and of course I was glad to get it. It has been so hard to write when I knew you all felt as bad as I did. The call was a big help, and I would have liked to talk to Daddy, but talking to you and Frank was a big help. I couldn't have made it home in time if I'd encountered any difficulty, so we decided not to try. I did feel as though I should have come. I do still, but I was just so up in the air. I don't think I could have done anybody any good. I thought of you all constantly, and when Friday morning came, I just thought I couldn't sit and wait, so I dressed, left the young'un with Lou's mother, and went out, presumably to go to Derby. But I went to the Catholic church up the street a ways. The door was open, so I went in to find several people saying their Lenten prayers. I found a janitor after a little bit and asked him if he'd find the priest for me. I was ushered through an arcade to his living quarters and then to his study. I told him amid my tears that I was not Catholic, but my brother was. He'd been killed, and the Mass was that morning. I was so far away and couldn't be there that I'd like him to go with me to the church, light a candle for Bob, and say a prayer. We went back to the church together. He lit 3 candles. I didn't understand why. And then we went to the altar before the figure of St. Joseph. We both kneeled on the prayer bench, and he prayed. Silently, I did too, and it did help immeasurably to know that, as I was there, you all were at church too. It did me lots of good to say my last goodbye to Bob, in his church, just as you were. I didn't feel quite so far away and left out, and I did feel that I had said at least some sort of tribute to Bob in last farewell. I'm very sorry to have been such a laggard in writing. It seemed hard to write about going to the church and all. I appreciate your letters so much that I'm even more ashamed for not writing at all.
And this is the part. I mean, this is just... It's the part that when I read it, I was just like, nope. This is the story I'd never heard. She didn't really, I mean, I can't recall her ever talking about it. Again, it had been very long after. But there's something about the symbolism of, we know this is the morning of the funeral. She can't be there. They said, what happens if they get stuck on the way? It's long distance. And it's not clear to me if she ever told Sydney or Lou where she went that morning. Because she basically says, she left the young'un with Lou's mother and went out, presumably to go to Derby. So they think she's going somewhere else. And she just starts to walk. It's not clear she has a car. And we looked at the map. Actually, our narrator for Florence's letter in the first episode, Jeanne, when she was visiting me, we looked it up to where they were at 936 Springfield Road and the proximity of the churches in the area, which is in walking distance. And there's only one church that's really in walking distance, pretty close by to where 936 Springfield Road is, and it's St. Joseph's Catholic Church. So we're certain that's the one she went to. The church is still open. It seems to be flourishing, which is great to see. They have the history. The priest that had been there in residence, there was one, and he just actually had just taken over. So the previous priest, their first pastor was the Reverend Otho C. Grommel. He serves as pastor at that church from 1916 to 1945. The next priest after that started in 1946, and he was there for like 30 years. And because it's the only priest that's really noted, we know that's who she was talking to. Clearly, he was really helping her through this difficult time. And then we have, if you didn't listen to season 1 originally, there's a lot of criticism of Bob marrying into a Catholic family because the Demarees, especially Chester, is very staunchly Presbyterian. Yeah. And then she basically, if there's ever a time where she's just over all of that difference, this is the moment where that comes through. Because she gives the most incredible line. She's able to still look back on this like the morning of. She's still journaling it. She's still writing it. And this letter, by the way, is not only going to Jeanne. It is a circular letter. It was addressed to Jeanne and her parents. So she's writing to her dad. This is where she was. And the line where she says, "It did me lots of good to say my last goodbye to Bob in his church, just as you were." Just to say, this is the ultimate acknowledgement for her that there is no difference. Everybody, we're all human and we're just going through this grieving process. And then the lighting of the candles, I don't know if you picked up anything from that. I mean, I'm sure it's the figure of St. Joseph, obviously, with the candle display in front. I don't recall this from my Lutheran background, so I can't comment on that. Jamie, maybe you know something about like the tradition of lighting the candles in front of the figure of St. Joseph there. I'm not sure, but
well, I mean, I think because it was St. Joseph's Church, it was probably that's why they were praying to the saint. But the 3 candles, I did look this up to make sure, and this it was probably just to invoke the Holy Trinity into the prayer, into each aspect of the Holy Trinity into this prayer.
Yeah,
I mean, they in the Catholic funerals, they will light sometimes more candles. Obviously, just because it's a funeral, Right. So instead of just lighting one, he wrote the 3. I think he realized that because in the Catholic Church, the Holy Trinity. You have to forgive me.
No,
this is for her to like. That's you feel like there's no coincidences.
No,
because the Catholic Church was the closest church, and that's where and I think she maybe like didn't know where she was going when she left, and kind of maybe had that feeling, and just like her feet took her there.
Yep.
And then for him to silently pray with her. Because he didn't know what to say. He didn't know Bob. This woman just walked into his church. So yeah, but I think the 3 candles was because it was such a poignant moment, and that he wanted to bring the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost into this. And it clearly, I mean, she felt better. Yeah, she felt better. But
I'm glad she had a place to go. I'm glad that he was there for her, even though she never joins the Catholic Church as a result of this or anything like that. Just knowing that they're still flourishing as a congregation That because there's a lot of churches that are hurting these days. They are flourishing and doing well. And, I'm very thankful to that and for the people, to complete strangers, to be there in times when people need them to be there, and especially the leadership at this time. But yeah. And we'll continue on from there because
onto the vitamin part.
Onto the vitamin part. She's still looking for a house. She does. Her feet are taking her somewhere, and she would like them to take her away from 936 Springfield Road as soon as possible.
Lewis has cut another tooth. That's 2 he has. His cold hangs on and on. I get him outside every day. That is at all fit. And while I believe he's better, it does last. And last. He is spoiled, of course, which has been the cause of near breakdowns and dragouts. I hope to be able to straighten him out if we can only get that little house. Lou is trying to get on-the-job training at the Navy Yard, which would be a big help, of course. We're having some trouble under the auspices of his mother. It is trying for us all, and I guess trouble is to be expected. I'm not being disappointed. There is much work to do, washings, ironings, etc., etc., and I am kept very busy. My day commences at 6:15 and lasts until about 11. Most of that time I'm busy at one thing or another. I don't believe I told you that the house is unfurnished. They're buying furniture secondhand from people who have to vacate, and who will sell good stuff awfully cheap to get rid of it. They've picked up some really good stuff, amazingly cheap. Here's what we've done so far.
Okay, before we get into this giant list of purchases that they're figuring out sort of a system here, she indicates clearly, I need to get out of this house. I need my space. I need my space. This is going to be the struggle of spring of 1946 past the tragic moments of it. This is the first time that we start seeing some dealing going on for furniture and things, and it's going to inform some future activities. I'm just going to leave that little hint out there as to Lou and Sweetie's abilities to find a good deal. They're going to play up this skill. So now we'll get into, here's everything Sweetie was able to find, because people don't have space to store it, so they have to move on.
7-piece walnut bedroom set, about 10 or 12 years old, but very well cared for. Made like the Ark itself, much nicer than new furniture downtown. New innerspring mattress, has been slept on twice. 7 pieces includes 1 bed, 2 spring, 3 mattress, 4 vanity, 5 bench, 6 dresser, 7 chest of drawers. Cost $65. They're giving us 2 spreads of matching drapes, too. Dining room set. I'm not sure what kind of wood. 1 buffet, 2 mirror, 3 server, small buffet, 4 china closet, 5 table, 2 leaves, 9, 4 leather bottom chairs, straight back, 10 one-armed hostess chair, cost $30. 1 sofa bed, looks like a regular Davenport, but makes out into a bed, good spring in it too. 2 a regular overstuffed Davenport and 2 matching, 4 chairs. Upholstery is good, but quite dark and a little drab. Total cost $35. A maple bed without spring and mattress, $2. We bought this before we found the good set. We're going to loan it to Elizabeth temporarily. A dining room set, 1 walnut gate leg table, a 2 small buffet with 3 separate mirror, and 3 6 chairs. They're splitting this set. The gate leg table goes in the living room. The small buffet goes into the baby's room for a dresser, along with 1 chair. The other 2 chairs go into our bedroom, cost $22.50. This lady also gave us a small ironing board, bread box, cake box, salt and pepper shakers to match, bread box and cake box, 3 thin skillets and 8 skewers and saucepans, a coaster, a whatnot shelf, and a pair of matched pictures, and a couple extras too.
Yeah, I'm going to pause here just so we can look at some of the, we'll do some inflation calculator things so we can work out the deals that they got here. And they're making friends. One of the people selling their wares was like, okay, here's the rest of what was in my kitchen,
Yeah.
which he's taking advantage of there. But and I should note here, I think most people know this, walnut's very hard to come by these days. So the fact that a number of these items are actually made of walnut makes them even more valuable back then. But if we just look at the first one, I think, which is basically everything from the bedroom, right? Chest of drawers, bed, spring mattress, all these cost $65 for what, like 7 items. So I'm going to go to the inflation calculator and we will check this out of what that's worth today from 1946. In 1946, we're still on the gold standard, so that's important. That's not a thing anymore.
No.
Yeah, $1,000, just over $1,000, $1,058. So $1,000 for 7 items. Pretty good.
Seems about like what you would spend on a bed set.
Yeah.
And this is a nice bed set.
Right. She said this is nice. Now they got the maple bed for $2 with the spring and mattress. She's like, oh, but then we found the good one. So $2, obviously, that's your backup bed. The other thing that's interesting here is she notes the sofa bed. And I find that fascinating because the way she says, she's explaining what it is. Isn't that nifty? Looks like a regular Davenport, but makes out into a bed. Like this is a new thing, which makes me think sofa beds were probably a new thing about this time period, or at least had made their way down into sort of like the common household. When I was a kid, she always had a sofa bed. She always had a sofa bed in the living room. When we were kids, there used to be the idea of like the hot dog. You know, we always loved being wrapped up in the bed and then yeah, we were small enough where that wasn't dangerous, but there's stories about that. I think she called it, she's like, I took these 2 little hot dogs, myself and my sister, and I wrapped them up in the bed and then put the sofa back in, and it was safe enough where obviously no one.
Oh, I'm sure it was fine. You're fine.
Yeah, but
you're fine.
Like, okay. We were like, yay. Yeah.
No, see, you and I, like, Allison and I are very, very close in age, and so like we grew up when, you know, it was okay. It's like, you're fine. Get up.
Yeah, that's fine.
You know what I'm saying?
You'll be fine.
You'll be fine. Like, we had fun.
Yeah.
We had a good child. We both, you know, like we grew up where there was no social media. This is great.
Yeah, not sure that's a good idea today.
I mean, don't do it. Obviously,
Don't try this at home. You know,
like, no. Don't do stupid stuff. But it's really kind of funny because she used the word Davenport.
Yeah. The Davenport.
And that's an old word. But you're right. So she kind of had to, like, a sofa bed. They're probably like, what's a sofa bed?
Yeah, like, do they have that in Iowa? Like, I can see in, like, city apartments, you know, where you're trying to economize on space. Probably, you know, is probably popular in New York or the cities. But Iowa, you have all the space and everything else. You have these bigger households. But she's explaining it. It's like when she explained what the word solid was. Like, oh, maybe that's when that kind of became a thing. Like, more people were doing this.
Well, you know that Chester loved reading all of this too.
Oh,
like,
for sure.
Like, this was kind of stuff he was like, oh, this is very, you know, probably helped take his mind off stuff too.
Oh yeah. And there was the one part where she writes she's not sure what the wood is. That's to Chester. Like, I know I didn't say it was walnut, this one's maple, I don't know what this one is. She's disclaiming.
You're so funny. That's probably right.
Yeah, because he's probably gonna write a letter and be like, what type of wood was the other set made of? You know that's gonna come in the mail. So she's, you know, she's gonna cut that one off before that gets
She could be like, it's mahogany, like Mom's dining chairs. Oh, wait,
the ones you didn't make yet.
The ones you've forgotten around.
I get the sense that was written there because this letter is going to Chester, and he would have been like, she didn't tell me. I'm going to send my questionnaire. He will do that. So I've seen responses to questionnaires that would be on it. But yeah, so she's just preventing that future issue. We'll continue from here.
You see, we're pretty well set. It is all good stuff, and we're sure we've gotten a bargain every time. With the sofa bed and the Davenport, we can take care of all the visitors who care to come and see us. You can gather from this that my attempts to persuade Lou to come back to Iowa have done no good. I've really tried, too, in showing how high prices are, etc., but I wasn't getting far. When this little house came up and when we found such good furniture at those prices, then I was just sunk, as far as coming back now is concerned. I'm still coming back in September to see you, though.
Yeah, and then this section, she's trying, but he's now kind of got a little bit of work over there at the Navy Yard. That's his specialty. And she's like, look how high the prices are. And it's like, he's like, oh, look, I found a house and look at this good deal on furniture. And she's like, oh, that's going to defeat my argument to go back to Iowa. If they get the deal on this house, which is still a big if at this time period, but they're hoping.
Well, let's take a step back from this. They're married.
Yep.
And in times in your marriage, you come across situations where you're button heads. Somebody wants one thing, somebody wants another thing.
Right.
And she's not like threatening him. She's not just leaving. She's trying to convince him. Like, hey, this would be great. Like, oh, look, it's so much easier. And he's like, no. He's just like, no, I'm not doing it. We're going to stay here. I got your house. I thought, hey, here's a house.
Yeah.
Well, they don't know. We don't know.
We hope we have it. We got all this furniture. It's a great deal. Good stuff.
And I think that this is like, he's like, I know how to get her. Hey, I got a good deal. He's like, oh, she doesn't want to spend a whole lot of money. I'll make sure I don't spend any money. I'll buy a bunch of furniture secondhand. Like, so yeah. So, I mean, but this is one of those things. And it's really to see the two of them work through this.
Yeah.
They're young.
Yep.
And it turned out to be really good for us, right?
Oh yeah.
They're in Pennsylvania, so. But yeah, but I do really like how we are getting, because that letter that we had in our last episode, we should go back and watch that, our premiere episode for season 2. Lou loves her so much. He just loves her so much.
Yeah.
And we should have never seen this letter. You know what I'm saying? Like, this was a very private letter.
Yeah.
Like, but we're getting to see like how their marriage is working and how they're working through what all couples have to go through at some point, where you're just like, you're at an impasse and you got to get through it.
And I wonder if some things kind of got delayed because of the war. Like some of the traditional potential, as I would imagine in my mind, not being married, but like sort of traditional arguments between newlyweds, because they got married in the middle of the war. So their day-to-day is not a normal day-to-day. She's working at the base. He's going to the base. They have a different routine in place. But when all of that is not in the picture anymore, and now it's just like traditional work, traditional, relationship stuff, they're experiencing that really for the first time, and with the baby, adding the new element, which they didn't have at the beginning, because at the beginning it was wartime. So this is now post-war. And I think that also potentially added a new element. And she's, looking at her surroundings, and all she's saying about her surroundings right now is, I got to get out of here. But she's like, I'm losing this fight. And I think Lou was probably there being like, you're losing this fight. Because he's a very honest individual. If we know anything about Lou, other than his jokes and things like that, I'm sure he really sat down with her and was like, look, my opportunities are here. There's more opportunities from here. The thing I know more than anything else is how to be a sailor and how to work on engines. And the most engines he could possibly work on in the Navy, when comparing Iowa to Philadelphia area, is going to be in the southeast of Pennsylvania. No doubt. There's just no argument against it. So until something else could potentially be figured out, it looks like they're staying here for a while. But she's excited. She's like, I'm still going to take a trip out in the fall. I'm so gonna come see you in the fall. No, I'm not stuck here full time. Like, I'm still taking a vacation. And then Lou's probably thinking, because he might have even read this letter before it went out. Now, when she goes in September, I gotta find a way to get her to come back.
Well, he's got it. Well, he knows what he's got to do. He's got to make her happy.
Yeah, he's got to
get her house. And
you better have that house by September, Lou. I'm just saying, you better figure something out here.
And you know what she did? She wrote that paragraph, and then she went, and that whole line is its own paragraph.
Oh, yeah, by itself. I'm going to see you in September. Yeah.
Lou.
Yep.
Yeah, because you're right, because he probably did read it.
Yep.
And he saw that, and he was like, oh. She didn't include it in the other paragraph. She made it, she emphasized it this way. This was an emphasis.
Yep.
We haven't weighed Fuzzhead, better known now as Shaggy Bean, since we left there. So we don't know what he weighs, but according to my aching arms, he's gaining weight. He doesn't laugh too readily, yet, though he smiles lots. As I said, he has 2 teeth, and when he is tired or crying, he calls, Ma, Ma, Ma. He doesn't care too much for Lou or his mother when he's tired, and Elizabeth is gone so much or is busy, so he doesn't pay her much attention. He is strong and is endeavoring to pull himself up to a standing position. He hasn't slept the night through since we've been here. He coughed so in the nights that he'd wake himself up, and now he has the old habit again. His cold has me worried. I've tried my best, but he still has it.
I'm hearing every day that cutting teeth makes it stay on. Is that true? He has no fever, but he does keep the cough.
Yeah, and then we get this update about her son, who has the nickname of Fuzzhead or Shaggy Bean.
That's so cute.
So it's so interesting because it's very trippy to see letters written describing my own father as a tiny baby. And Jamie and I were talking about this previously, to see the things that carry through nearly 80 years later. The laugh too readily, and though he smiles lots, is true to this day.
That is so true of your father. When I met him, I noted when I read that, I was like, I even wrote it, still like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he absolutely is. Now he's developed more of a vocabulary than ma, but in the interim, so time period. But then there's also this line, he's going to care more for Lou in the future, or his mother. That refers to Sydney when he's tired. And Elizabeth, and there's the line here about Elizabeth. Elizabeth is gone so much or is busy, he doesn't pay her much attention. Elizabeth's an interesting individual. And now that the focus has shifted to Pennsylvania, we're going to get a lot more information about Elizabeth, or Lou's nickname for Elizabeth, which is Dit.
Like Ditzy?
Yeah, like Ditzy, D-I-T, Dit. It's basically because I think the story goes that when Lou was really little and her name was given, Elizabeth, that's a lot of syllables for a young kid. So he just called her Dit, because that's what you could say.
Okay.
And it stayed. So now that has stayed historically in the oral tradition of the family. But like I'll never forget the look on my dad's face when he talks about his Aunt Elizabeth, and I believe that hers is going to go to like Betty as opposed to like Lizzie or something like that. So we can keep it absolutely straight from
good with
from
sister,
Elizabeth, right? Lizzie, Margaret Elizabeth, which is sister on the Demaree side. This is the Graham side, Elizabeth. So I'm going to probably be referring to her as Dit pretty continuously, just to keep everybody straight, and in honor of how Lou would always call her. But I just remember seeing my dad's face every time to this day, and it's just like, Dit. She's an interesting character.
So your father calls her Dit because his father called her Dit. That's great.
Her nickname,
I love that.
Dit. Yeah, the way he says it. I'll have to get him like interviewing and talking about who Elizabeth was as like a character. Marguerite was with Joe, and that everybody has the different personalities, but we see it here. And he's a baby. He's 6 months old. He doesn't pay her much attention. The other characters he doesn't know as well, but he's like, no. So, and I'm sure he's gonna listen to this portion and just be like, yep. So, and that's gonna be the end of it. Yeah.
They've had to discard 2 pairs of shoes for his feet. Just couldn't wear them. His toes were banging the ends. His little blue knit suits are being put away. They're just too tight. That leaves him the 2 knit wool suits from England, and about 2 of the others, so we do need that romper. I'm going to buy a romper pattern and make him some more. He loves to be outdoors, cries to go out, and cries when he has to come in. I hear him crying now, so I guess I'll have to go out and see about him. I'm anxious to have that bulletin and the romper. I'll try to write better, I promise. Send me the woman's address in Kansas City. I'd like to drop her a card. I've got to go now. I love you all. Sweetie, Lou, and Louis. P.S. We will want you to ship the furniture and Crystal, but we'll wait to write when to do it.
Yeah, so that's all still back in Iowa. The stuff from the wedding gifts and things like that are still not with them. They're not going to be sent probably until they get the house. But she ends it sort of on a, she's starting to move forward just a little bit here. Not by much, but she's like, you know what, I have to get into my routine so she can continue to process everything that's gone on. But these 3 letters together, the 8th, the 9th, the 15th, are just some incredible letters to still have in the collections, to still see, what happened, as sad as it is, with having more details than what the paper could provide. Because if other letters didn't survive,
the idea of like, here's what happened and here's who was where and things like that, that's not going to be in the newspaper articles. We say farewell to Bob. We look to the coming months with Sweetie. We hope that she does not have to stay with Sydney much longer. Yeah. And so the question of our upcoming episodes is going to be, how long is it going to take for her to get out of 936 Springfield Road? With that, thank you everybody for listening to today's episode, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.